My name is Clint Taylor, and this is my Module 4 assignment presentation. So anyways, today we're going to be discussing H2S poison gas safety. Alright, hopefully you guys can follow along on the slideshow that I've sent out to all of y'all, and we can get through this presentation and hopefully learn a little bit of something today. Alright, if you go to the next slide, I got some motivational pictures there for you guys. Whether you work in barge rigs, land rigs, jackups, drill ships. I know when I was working out in West Texas, H2S was a pretty big deal coming out of those land rigs. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind. If you go to the next slide, what is H2S? H2S stands for hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a manufactured as well as naturally occurring poisonous gas. It's emitted from volcanoes, hot springs, but mainly, most importantly for us, it's a component of natural gas and crude oil. H2S also occurs naturally as a byproduct of the decomposition process, especially the decomposition process of organic material and manure. H2S even occurs naturally in our own digestive system. Next slide's about H2S exposure limits. Now, keep in mind the differences in the exposure limits. So you got the OSHA permissible exposure limit for H2S is 20 parts per million, with a one-time exposure of 50 parts per million is allowed if it's no more than 10 minutes and it only occurs once. Now, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health has a recommended exposure limit of 10 parts per million. And the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists has a threshold limit value for an 8-hour workday of 1 part per million and a short-term exposure limit of 15 minutes for 5 parts per million for H2S gas. Now, the thing to consider with those is you kind of got to pay attention to the wording that's being used. With the OSHA one, you have a permissible exposure limit. With the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, you have a recommended exposure limit. Obviously, going with the less gas is always going to be better. That's why that one's recommended versus permissible. Go to the next slide. You've got your routes of entry. The most common route of entry for H2S is breathing it in the ambient air. It can also be absorbed through the skin and eyes, but that's in pretty high concentrations. Normally, most of your damage is going to come from inhalation. All right, the next slide, you got the dose-response relationship of H2S, so pretty much its effects on your health at given concentrations. So at 0.01 parts per million, it becomes detectable by odor. Not going to do you any harm. 2 to 5 parts per million, prolonged exposure could cause nausea, but that's pretty unlikely. At 20 parts per million, you have some possible fatigue, loss of appetite, headache, irritability, poor memory, dizziness, but again, those symptoms are less common at 20 parts per million. At 100 parts per million, it becomes immediately a health concern. So you're going to have your coughing, some eye irritation. You're not going to be able to smell it after 2 to 5 minutes. It's going to destroy your body's ability to smell it, and you're going to have some altered breathing, some drowsiness after 15 to 30 minutes, throat irritation after an hour, and the symptoms will get worse over time. Death could even occur if you're exposed to 100 parts per million for 48 hours. At 500 to 700 parts per million, you're going to have staggering, and then you're going to collapse within 5 minutes. Serious damage to the eyes in 30 minutes and death within an hour. 700 to 1,000 parts per million, you're rapid unconsciousness. You're going to collapse within 1 to 2 breaths, and then you will eventually die from it within minutes. And then 1,000 to 2,000 parts per million is going to be nearly instant death. Who's at risk? Oil field workers, so all of you guys, anybody exposed to the gases coming out of the ground, coming out of that well bore, or being around any stored hydrocarbons, liquid or gas hydrocarbons, could be giving off H2S gas. Workers who clean septic tanks and sewer systems, and workers who work in piggeries, confinement systems of swine, beef, dairy, or veal operations that contain liquid manure storage components. So safety measures. On this slide, you see we've got a picture of a H2S monitor that you all should be wearing clipped to your coveralls. Got a picture of a guy using a gas sniffer to check the gas in a confined space. Thing to remember about H2S is it is more dense than air, so as you go down into a confined space, it'll actually become more and more concentrated because it pushes all that air out of there. So you got your personal H2S monitors, your area H2S monitors. Remember, your breathing apparatus, ventilation equipment, respirators, things like that are really what's going to help you out. The next two slides, we've got a couple of case studies. You're more than welcome to read through those. Just different situations where people have died from H2S exposure. The second one is a guy who was in a bathroom connected to a manure pit. He developed nausea, vomiting, dizziness, and he died a few hours later. And it was a hemorrhagic bronchitis and asphyxiation were noted as his causes of death. So just keep in mind this last slide right here, the threat is real. Protect yourself. There's been 80 deaths reported by OSHA due to H2S inhalation in ambient air between 1984 and 1994. Know the preventative measures, wear your PPE monitors and PPE where needed, and always think safety first in everything we do. And you can be like that guy in the bottom left-hand picture there, just give him the thumbs up with your breathing apparatus on. Hopefully you guys are doing a good job of using all those safety measures and continue to do so. And make sure there's no point in going out and working these jobs and making money if you're not going home at the end of the day with all your fingers and toes in your life. So just keep that in mind and get out there and keep doing a good job. And I'm sure I'll be in touch with you all soon.